Hi, I'm Peyton Falconer, and this is the Climate Crisis Hotline. We're a group of students who are hoping to share what we've learned about climate justice and inspire other students to get involved in the upcoming mass lobby. So Ireland does have plans in place to mitigate the effects of climate change, but our first guest will discuss how this isn't enough and how climate change policy can be incredibly selective and discriminatory. So to help us unpack how climate justice seeks to tackle this inequality head-on, we're joined by Chloe Moore, who's researched how environmental policy intersects with gender, class, and social identity. So welcome, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
And so the first question is just why do we need intersectionality with climate justice?
Well, as I'm sure most of you know, those who contribute the least to climate change are hit the hardest by its effects. These groups are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change for a multitude of reasons. I mean, just consider how a family in the rural global south would be able to recover from a climate change-induced natural disaster versus mega polluter Jeff Bezos. There's just certain limitations given to certain groups of people. And climate justice understands this and aims to rectify the negative effects of climate change by fighting for those who caused the problem to solve it. The movement understands that those who cause the least amount of climate damage tend to be burdened by climate policy to tackle climate change and are least likely to see the benefits of these climate policies and don't have their voices heard in decision-making spaces or are less likely to be in those spaces in the first place.
Right, and can you give me some examples of what this actually looks like?
Yeah, so if you consider climate justice through a feminist lens, we take a look globally. Women are more likely to die, up to 5 times more likely actually, more than men due to climate-related issues. Women are also disproportionately poor in comparison to men, also globally, making adapting to climate policy and recovering from the effects of climate change just that much more impossible. So as you can see, even in these major ways, these broad examples, there's one major group that is completely being left out of our climate change policy.
Right, and what about in Ireland specifically?
Yeah, so if we look again at the main disadvantaged social group, women, to dive into this, we must first recognize that women are far more likely to be in caring roles, which is a big factor in all of this. Caring roles could be for a disabled loved one, for children, for work, or for so on. And this care work is often unpaid, and it is an expectation in society that women are supposed to be the carers and the resource gatherers. So let's take a look at public transport, considering this. It has very poor carrying capacities. If you think about it, public transport is really made for one male breadwinner. Look at the average double-decker buses we use here in Dublin. If you look at the signs on the buses, you'll see that there is, at most, space for one wheelchair user or pram, and about 60 to 90 spaces for able-bodied single persons. So if this one wheelchair or pram spot is filled, the bus will just sail by. And this isn't even considering the extra challenge of using public transportation during busy times. And while this is obviously disadvantaging single wheelchair users, it is also disadvantaging carers. Public transport being intended for one specific type of person is ultimately not a feasible option for those in caring roles or with certain disabilities, and therefore these people are forced into car usage. And beyond that, there are safety concerns with using public transport that most able-bodied men do not have to worry about, as there is no other option available to these groups, disabled people, women, other groups of carers. They are forced to pay a high carbon tax on petrol. Or if we consider energy use, the second shift is mainly taken on by women, and it punishes them more for their energy use. As we have dynamic pricing for energy consumption during peak times, women, who are far more likely to be cooking and cleaning after their jobs during these peak times, are disproportionately pushed into energy poverty. Data shows that those most impacted by energy poverty are female lone parents renting private accommodation here in Ireland. Or the traveler community, who is disproportionately impacted also by energy poverty, which we'll talk about again in a minute, or groceries, food prices increase because of climate change, and women often suffer to let their children eat, they'll go hungry, or even before that, women are far more likely to be doing the grocery shopping, and so therefore they are spending far more money. And all of this is exacerbated by the gender pay pension gap in Ireland, and it's harder for women to recover from all of this, let alone the severe weather events, due to this pay and pension gap. It's just one compounding, exacerbating system, and that's only if we focus on women.
And so why doesn't the Just Transition adequately handle this? You mentioned that travelers aren't eligible for government energy saving schemes.
Yeah, so Irish climate policy has a bias towards men, the wealthy, and other majority groups. Certain identities are kind of just forgotten in the creation of this climate response. So the Just Transition is supposed to support communities transitioning into a low carbon economy, and it focuses on 3 dimensions, the first being geographical location, second being employment, and the third being identity. The geographical location factor mostly focuses on the Midlands. Midlands are particularly impacted by the move to green jobs, having poor public transport links, and certain areas that are at particular risk of sea level rising, with certain places already being impacted by flooding. But the employment dimension is being tackled with a narrow-minded focus. The jobs in agriculture, peatlands, transport, mining, and other extractive industries will be impacted by the change towards a green future, and these jobs are all male-dominated. There is little thought given to the indirect effects of other industries, such as farming, in which farmers are able to participate in policy relating to the green transition, but farm laborers are not. And if we look at the statistics, only 13% of farm holders are women in Ireland. Yet migrant women make up a large and often invisible portion of the agricultural and food production industries within Ireland. And then the identity aspect is also lacking. So travelers who live in trailers or caravans are not eligible for government-funded retrofitting, despite being vulnerable to energy poverty. The current government retrofitting scheme offers energy-saving upgrades to homeowners, landlords, and housing bodies, notably not renters or travelers. I mentioned that the lack of modes of public and active transport that are accessible to disabled people, again, showing a governmental oversight.
And why should the students listening care?
Well, I don't know a single student who owns a home. Most students tend to rent, which means that you are being made to pay more for your energy than somebody who is likely more financially secure than you, a homeowner. Students are also subject to these peak energy time prices, as we are often in college all day. And many students are also women, carers, and other groups that are overlooked. Most importantly, caring about others and partaking in the government process is part of being a good citizen. If you are Irish, please participate in the mass lobby being held on December 3rd and support equal access to green solutions.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're joined by Sarah, a researcher exploring the environmental impacts of artificial intelligence, a topic that sits right at the crossroads of technology, climate, and sustainability. AI often gets talked about as a digital or immaterial tool, but Sarah's work helps us see what's behind the screen, from data centers to carbon footprints. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to chat about it because I think that AI is often seen as invisible or clean, but there are actually very large environmental impacts behind it.
I think a lot of people don't immediately connect AI with environmental costs, but what first made you interested in researching this intersection between AI and climate impact and sustainability?
Well, firstly, I am currently writing my dissertation that's exploring the carbon costs of intelligence, basically the energy and resource footprint of AI systems and the data centers that power them. I'd say I was drawn to it because I think AI has often been seen as a climate solution. For example, helping to optimize energy systems or predict weather patterns, but I realized that we rarely ask what the environmental cost of AI might actually be. So I've been conducting a lot of research that looks at how AI development intersects with climate policy, sustainability goals, and especially within Ireland.
You touched on something that's kind of rarely discussed, the hidden infrastructure behind AI. Could you give us a kind of clearer picture of what AI's environmental footprint actually looks like in practice? Like, what are the main areas of impact that people might not realize?
I think that's a great question because it is surprisingly large, the environmental impacts. When we train big AI models like ChatGPT, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of litres of water just to cool the systems. And there's also a massive electricity demand behind it. Globally, data centers already use around 1 to 1.5% of all electricity, and in Ireland it's even more striking at around 21% of total electricity use, according to the Central Statistics Office. So the environmental footprint isn't just carbon emissions, it's also water use, land use, and grid pressure. And because these facilities operate 24/7, they can make it a lot harder for countries to meet renewable energy targets.
It sounds like there's a kind of growing awareness, but maybe not quite enough accountability yet. But how are researchers and policymakers responding to these challenges? Like, are there real moves towards regulating or kind of greening AI development?
So there is actually growing recognition of these issues. There have been some researchers that are calling for what they're saying green AI, where you focus on efficiency and transparency in how the models are built and powered. The EU ethics guideline for trustworthy AI even includes environmental well-being as one of 7 key principles, linking AI to the European Green Deal. But the challenge is these frameworks are mostly voluntary. In other words, there are no reinforcements or enforcements rather behind it. So in practice, AI companies can still expand without fully disclosing full energy or water use. That's where the ethical accountability comes in, asking not just can we build bigger AI models, but should we, given the environmental costs.
And Givette, that's really interesting. And like, since you're from Ireland and your research focuses on Ireland, how does this issue play out here specifically? What makes Ireland such a kind of unique or important case in this kind of global conversation about AI and sustainability?
Yeah, well, Ireland's actually a perfect case study. We have become a global hub for data centres. This is because of our cooler climate, tax incentives, and connectivity to the transatlantic cables. But that success comes with trade-offs. Researchers have described it as digital I never know how to...
As what?
Extractivism. Yes. Researchers have described it as digital extractivism, where global tech firms draw heavily on national resources like energy and water. This has created a lot of real tensions. ERGA has even introduced moratoria on new data centre connections in parts of Dublin because of grid strain. So Ireland's experience shows how the digital economy and climate policy can clash with infrastructure grows faster than environmental planning.
Wow, given everything that you've found, the kind of scale, the policy gaps and the local tensions, what do you think needs to change kind of going forward? How can AI be developed in a way that's genuinely sustainable?
Well, I think we need to move from talking about smart technologies as if they're immaterial to seeing them as physical systems with real ecological costs. That means more transparency, stricter reporting requirements, and integrating AI planning into climate and energy policy. At a broader level, it's also about shifting from efficiency to sufficiency, asking how much computation is actually necessary and who benefits from it. Because ultimately, sustainability in AI isn't just a technical issue, it's an ethical and political one.
That's such an important point to end on, shifting from kind of seeing AI as a purely digital tool to recognizing its physical and ecological footprint. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Your research really helps to reframe the conversation about technology and climate in a way that's urgent, but also hopeful.
Well, no, thank you for having me, and I will see you on the next episode.
Yeah, perfect. See you next week. Welcome back to the Climate Crisis Hotline. Ireland's often praised for reducing its landfill waste, but is burning our rubbish really a sustainable answer? Our next guest, Hazel, explores the environmental and social impacts of waste incineration, including Dublin's Poolbeg facility, and how Ireland's approach compares to other European models of waste and energy management. Hazel, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Magnus. I've always found incineration to be a tricky one. It's portrayed as clean and efficient, but when you take a closer look, it brings up a lot of questions about how sustainable that approach really is.
So Hazel, incineration is one of those topics that doesn't always make the headlines, but it's such a big part of how Ireland deals with waste. What first drew you to this issue, and why do you think it's such an important conversation to be having right now?
I first became interested because incineration sits right at the intersection of climate action and waste management. In Ireland, we've reduced our reliance on landfills, which is great, don't get me wrong, but incineration has now become a major part of how we handle waste, especially through facilities like Poolbeg in Dublin. What's interesting is that while incineration does help reduce landfill waste and generate energy, it also creates emissions and ash, and can make it harder to prioritise recycling and waste prevention. So it's a really complex balance between short-term efficiency and long-term sustainability.
You describe incineration as a kind of balancing act, reducing landfill on one hand, but raising long-term sustainability questions on the other. Can you break that down a bit more? What kind of impact does incineration actually have on Ireland's overall waste system and our environmental goals?
It's really a bit of a double-edged sword. On one side, incineration has helped Ireland reduce landfill use and recover energy from waste, which sounds positive, but the downside is what's called a waste lock-in. Essentially, once these facilities are built, they rely on a steady stream of waste to stay financially viable. This can end up discouraging recycling or waste reduction, and because the contracts are long-term, it can tie us into systems that don't fully match the EU's circular economy goals.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially the idea of being locked into kind of certain waste systems. When we look at countries like Sweden or Denmark, how does Ireland's approach stack up? Are there lessons we could learn from how other European nations handle waste-to-energy systems?
Countries including Sweden and Denmark also use waste-to-energy systems. However, they've integrated it into much broader circular systems. For example, utilising the heat produced to power homes using district heating networks. Ireland does not have the same infrastructure, so the overall efficiency is lower. On the other hand, many European countries are now scaling back on incineration to concentrate on more recycling and waste prevention, while Ireland is still expanding. So there's certainly room to learn from these models.
It sounds like the key issue is kind of finding a balance between managing waste now and planning sustainability for the future. So looking ahead, what kind of changes do you think need to happen? Whether that's policy shifts, infrastructure improvement, or even just changing how we think about waste in everyday life?
In my opinion, we need to view incineration as a temporary tool, not a long-term solution. It can play a role, but it should certainly not replace investment in waste prevention or recycling. We also need more transparency and accountability in how facilities are governed so that the environmental goals aren't overshadowed by commercial interests. All in all, it's about shifting focus from managing waste efficiency to creating less waste in the first place.
That's such a valuable perspective, Hazel, a reminder that real sustainability isn't just about where our waste goes, but about how we prevent it in the first place. Thank you so much for joining us and helping unpack what's often an overlooked part of Ireland's climate story.
Thank you, Magnus.
Thank you.
So Ireland has plans to deal with climate change, but our next guest says they fall short when water reaches the streets. The rise of sea level is already changing daily life, and if we're not careful, the burden will land on people with the least voice. We have Max here today to explain what smarter and fairer protection looks like.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks for coming. So first up, why are we talking about sea level rise now? What does it mean for people rather than just lines on a map?
It's easy to picture sea level rise as a slow tide in the future, but in practice, a small lift in the baseline changes today's odds. The same storm now sits on higher water, so ordinary high tides reach further. Drains clear more slowly and short floods happen more often. You feel it when on a coastal bus skips stops, when a cycle path is closed after heavy rain, or when a shop has to open late because the floors are flooded. None of those moments is dramatic on its own, but they add up for renters, students and small businesses. That is not only a coastal engineering issue though. It is about keeping routes open, keeping services reliable and making sure the places we still love work on wet Tuesdays in November.
And so what about within Ireland specifically? Where is this already being felt and how does it show up here?
Well, looking at Ireland specifically, the clearest signs are around our bays and estuaries where homes, jobs and transport sit beside the water. Around Dublin Bay, the low stretches that link coastal neighbourhoods to the city are the weak points. When the spring tides meet heavy rain, we get pooled water on the seafront roads, coastal paths closed or rail services or buses slowed. The same pattern appears in Cork Harbour and along Galway Bay, where one flooded bend can stall deliveries and make earlier shifts unreachable. The small Atlantic towns often rely on a single coastal road for clinics, schools, shops and other businesses. We can also see change in our natural buffers. Beaches that used to rebuild over winter now don't rebuild as well. Dunes that should roll landward are pinned by car parks or walls, so they thin out and protect less. Salt marshes, sheltered inlets struggles to keep pace when it cannot migrate. Quiet changes are causing big problems.
So is the answer just higher walls, or what would a good protection plan look like?
Higher walls help to look after very specific pinch points, but on their own they shift problems down the coast and still get overtopped in bigger storms. A better plan starts by letting nature do some of the work. Wider beaches, healthier dunes and salt marshes absorb wave energy before it reaches the streets. That means caring for our dunes, adding sand carefully where it fits and giving marshes room to move inland. Then we add focused engineering where it protects the most people and services. Raise a short length of the quay beside a clinic, use removable barriers at a substation, seal vents and lift thresholds on key buildings. And finally we make space, so we're not fighting physics every winter. New builds step back from the most exposed line, critical equipment sites sit above flood level, clear drains before storm seasons, keep pumps ready with backup power and send warnings early enough that renters and shift workers can change route. When these pieces work together, daily life keeps moving and the coast remains a place people can use.
After a short intermission, we're back. Apologies for the location change. But Ireland already has adaptation plans, so if these plans exist, why are they not enough? And who is being left out when seas rise?
That's a beautiful question. So the plans already contain good pieces, but they often start with the map of major assets instead of just mapping daily life itself. It's easier to fund a visible wall by a landmark than a living shore or a routine work that keeps drains clear and the bus routes open. That pulls attention to concentrate on at the waterfront and away from the streets a few blocks inland where the floods are felt first. There is also a gap between who gets invited early and who carries the costs. Homeowners with time and contracts make the workshops. Renters, students, carers and shift workers are busy or hear about them too late. Supports then flow to property owners while tenants face higher insurance and more disruption with no power to retrofit the building. Design details can exclude even when they have good intentions. A barrier keeps a road dry but leaves the footpath underwater. So a scheme protects a substation but it ignores a bus stop in a known dip. So service users get skipped on wet mornings. What is missing is scale for nature-based projects, real space for the coast to move, and participation that starts early with the people who have the least backup when things go wrong.
So why should the students listening care?
Well, the students listening should care because most students rent, they share houses and move on fixed timetables. So when a coastal bus route floods, you miss your labs, you can miss work, and that carries a huge cost. Also, you can't retrofit your building to raise the street up, so you feel the impacts without the levers to fix them. And peak travel and peak energy are the hours you use, which means disruption lands right on you. There's also the future you're stepping into. The work many of us want in planning, engineering, ecology and business depends on Ireland delivering the adaptations that works. Getting involved now is civic minded and is smart for all of our futures and careers.
Well, that was really informative. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed that. I was glad to spread some light on this concerning topic.
Thanks for listening, and if you can, please join us at the Climate Mass Lobby on Wednesday, December 3rd at Buswell's Hotel Dublin. For more information and to register, check out stopclimatechaos.ie.